Hello, everybody. If you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button so that you can get notified when I'm dropping new video content, just like this one that you're watching right here. Now, on to part 5 of my awakening journey, which is titled The Attachment Rupture. So something really big that I constantly teach in my work, in my teaching, and my methodology that I use is that typically, in order to move into the divine, in order to move into a total connection and incarnation with God, that we have to go through a very big attachment rupture, where we have to move and dispel and move through our deepest human attachment trauma in order to reorient our attachment system to that of God. And so this is what I'm going to be talking about in this video, which for timeline purposes, it's going to be taking us from about April 2023 to present, right? So as I mentioned in the previous video, in April 2023, my partner that I'd been with for 2 years, the girl in Austin, we split up in April of 2023, which is about a year and 8 months ago. And when we split up, we had been together for 2 years, but we had only seen each other for 2 weeks in Portland. One trip for me to Austin for 4 months. She came to Canada once for 2 months, then another trip to Austin for 2.5 months, and then one final trip to Austin, which is the final trip that I did, and we broke up immediately after, where I went down for a week. So while we were together for 2 years, we were actually only together in person for basically a year. So basically half the time we were together in person, half the time we were doing long distance. And so this relationship was really, really massively instrumental in terms of my process, my awakening journey, and in particular, my spiritual initiation. I don't believe that I ever would have gone through my spiritual initiation had it not been for meeting this woman. That we were lovers in a past life, we were twin flames, whatever you want to call it. We had this ancient sort of karmic connection that when we basically got in orbit and sort of began to align with one another in 2020, God basically initiated this process in the path for both of us. Well, our paths and our processes were different. We both were being spiritually initiated at the same time. We were coming from massive different ends of the spectrum, in terms of age difference, different countries. We were at different stages of our life. She had been married for almost 20 years, had teenage kids. I didn't have any kids. I had never been married. I was kind of like a quasi step parent for that time when I was down there. And so there were so many obstacles that we had to overcome. It was the type of thing where we are always fighting upstream. We're always like, one day, someday, we'll finally have some fucking ease. That was always the thing between us. We're like, finally, one day, someday, we'll have some ease. But it was a roller coaster. When things were amazing, they were amazing. But we weren't able to ground this this crazy ethereal spiritual connection in the practical reality. We're actually like really good at the long distance, and we have this very sensual connection, this very spiritual connection, this very emotional connection. But when it came to like how our two particular traumas intersected, at least at this particular point in time, there was a lot of triggering. There was a lot of conflict and a lot of contention. No abuse or anything like that, but it was we just triggered each other a lot. And we basically brought up the deepest avenues of one another's shadow, right? But what was really interesting about this relationship, and I'm going to get into the actual attachment rupture portion of it, what that was like, what my journey was like, and kind of how this influenced my work and my awakening journey. But I remember in the 2 years that we were together, and particularly if you'll remember from one of the previous videos, I went on an anti-anxiety medication, summer 2022, and that's when I really moved out of the acute stage of my spiritual initiation. And I was sort of in a different place, and I think at the time, my partner, the partner I'm talking about here, didn't really know how to relate to me because I was a lot more regulated in my system. I was able to anchor and hold myself come the fall of 2022. about summer 2022, fall 2022, I was able to like move my body and exercise again. Like I wasn't able to even do anything, like barely walk for like a year and 3/4, a year and 2/3. I could barely move. I wasn't even functional in my body. And so being able to move my body and exercise, being on the anti-anxiety medication, just understanding this process more, moving out of the acute stage, I really started to get glimpses of my higher self. Like, and I started to really be able to feel tangibly these glimpses of my higher self in my body. Like I think I mentioned in the previous video, this idea of really being regulated, vibrant in my nervous system, where it felt like Christmas in Hawaii. That was a word that I used to describe how I was feeling. It was like Christmas in Hawaii, where you really began to feel this level of joy, regulation, groundedness, anchoredness, but also vibrancy that I had never experienced in my entire life. And so with this relationship, and the reason why I bring this up about the higher self is that we were trying to ground and anchor the highest possible ascending versions of ourselves, but we weren't able to ground the psychic spirit realm and the human realm. That in our connection, we were accessing again our highest possible selves, but we weren't able to ground them in the body. Well, we had pockets and glimpses, and particularly through things like intimacy and lovemaking, which is really common in things like twin flame connections. You have glimpses and portals of the capability or capacity or potential and possibility of what you could create together, which is so much of showing Jamie in his highest self. If Jamie were in his ultimate power and able to hold and ground that power in his body. And so I had so many glimpses of it. And we collectively and co-creationally had so many glimpses of this higher self co-creation, sacred union when we were together, but we could just never quite land it consistently, right? We were never able to hold it. And what I basically came to learn in sort of the healing process in the year and 3/4 since we split up was that we weren't able to, at least at that particular time. And so we were brought to each other in service to be catalysts, to expose and bring up the deepest levels of one another's shadow, our human attachment, our different trauma. And basically, we actually brought it up in terms of a past life and ancient generational and ancestral level. So we were basically sort of trauma bonds, and we had this codependent connection, but in the spirit realm, in sort of the quantum field is what I like to say. And so basically when we split up, it was like going through an attachment rupture in the quantum realm, in the quantum field. It was basically like I was collapsing a timeline from a past life, and I was collapsing a level of karma, ancient and generationally, down my family line by meeting this woman and then eventually us going through the breakup. And so what was happening when we had met is we were accessing an ancient timeline. We were accessing a really ancient timeline, right? And so what happens with these type of connections, you know what I mean? A karmic spiritual relationship, a trauma in the spirit realm, or like a twin flame connection, is the spirit and the psychic timeline doesn't merge and co-create with the human timeline, right? Because obviously we have all this sort of karmic sort of spiritual energy generationally, past lives, but we also have all our trauma from this lifetime and all the different things that we need to work through in this lifetime. And very much we have where we are in our process when we meet, and we weren't able to connect those two pieces, right? We weren't, so there was constantly a separation in timelines between the spirit psychic timeline that me and this woman were meeting on, and trying to ground it in the real earthly human realm. There was always a level of contention and conflict with trying to merge and harmonize these different timelines, right? This is why I always say that things like twin flames, most often, while not always, are typically catalysts and not sacred union relationships. They're typically brought to us to be really challenging, to be really passionate, to be ignited with so much ethereal energy and so much emotional ferocity and sexual energy, to bring up what needs to be brought up so that us as human beings can move into the full integration and wholeness of our human self. And we can actually begin the process through our own sort of capacity, our own sort of sovereign energetic process of really beginning to merge our own sort of psychic spirit timeline with our human timeline, which is that's what happens when the psychic spirit timeline and the human timeline finally find harmony and sync up in the body. This is what I call the God timeline, or also this is the integration of the higher self. Obviously, if you're cluing into this YouTube channel, you're cued into and clued into words like the higher self, and that's probably something that's really attractive and enticing to you if you're watching this. And so when the spirit and the psychic timeline harmonize finally with the human timeline, that's when we really, really integrate the higher self. And at the particular juncture where I met this woman in the 2 years that we went through the relationship from 2021 to 2023, neither one of us quite at that point were ready to live in the full vibration of the higher self, right? And typically that's why those connections come. Like, are you both ready to move into this vibration? And typically what happens is either one or both people are not actually ready. But in that connection, there were so many practical, just real human things that weren't quite in alignment. So while we had this past life connection, this karma, and this crazy connection that had so much energy, in the practical sort of human timeline, it didn't quite sync up. And so we kind of realized that love is not enough. And so it kind of carried this sort of sweet sorrow thing. And we got to a point where we realized, okay, this is just too difficult and love shouldn't be this hard, which is what happened when it came to April 2023. Also, just too much damage had been done probably in the first half of our relationship, with the amount of resentment that she held towards me, with how much she had to anchor and co-regulate for me because of the crazy process I was going in. Even though by the end of our relationship, I was a completely different person, it didn't matter, because what was living in her body was this imprint of me from earlier on that we wouldn't be able to move through, at least while we were still together. And it needed space and it needed healing. We had to go down our own journeys, which brought us to the process of April 2023, when we finally broke up, which is I call the attachment rupture. And also just to say with that, when it comes to grounding the higher self, there's so much energy. So there was so much crazy energy in this relationship and this connection that we were always trying to ground, and we always had a really hard time grounding. And it actually led to both of us having physical symptoms, physical sensations that were really ungrounding, right? The type of thing where you make love and have intimacy, and then you have this crazy reverberating sort of vibration through your body that ungrounds you for fucking days, because the amount of ferocity of connection that is co-produced through the holy merging between the two of you is so big that the human body, where we're at in our current sort of energetic and nervous system capacity, can't fucking hold that connection. We have too much density, too much rubble, too much sort of trauma. And so what was being brought up at the time was way too much for both of our bodies to hold. Like, her body was breaking down and it was leading to crazy levels of purging. While it was moving so much energy, it was creating so much inconsistency, a lack of stability. I mean, I had all this fear coming up, right? My hypochondria, which I mentioned, was being spiked, and I was like, am I okay? And I was like always looking to her for reassurance, looking for my fucking mommy, looking for the surrogate mother, because of the level of energy that was coming, asking, my anxiety being spiked, am I okay? Like, am I okay in my body? Because at the time, I didn't know what was happening in my body. I didn't know the ways that God was anointing me. I didn't know how this process of energetic mapping showed up or shows up in the body in the way that I do now. And so in the time between that relationship, is where everything began to integrate, is where everything began to make sense. And I understood in so many ways why this relationship wasn't supposed to work out. And I have so much gratitude for it. I'm so grateful for it. I look at her and the relationship with so much reverence. Even though there is the grief and the poetry and sort of the longing and sweet sorrow about it, it does feel like poetry or a movie or a country song or one of those romance novels that doesn't have the happy ending. It does feel like that. The level of what it opened me up to personally and professionally, basically, it created my work that I now teach. This relationship is one of the greatest influences of what it opened me up individually, but also now how I view relationships and what I actually see sacred union as. And so my spiritual initiation combined with this woman massively influenced how I teach and the way I structure it and why I teach these things and how I talk about sacred union. And so I wouldn't have actually gone through my spiritual initiation if it weren't for this woman, because what was brought up in this relationship, I wouldn't have been able to access on my own. And so it was almost like all the work that I do in 2020, the priming that I do, the amount of healing work that I do, God was like, okay, Jamie's fucking ready. He's ready he was repressed in a past life, but now in this life, he is going to become fully fucking expressed. And so God brought me this woman as an angel that came in the form of like a shadow catalyst or this karmic recreation or this lover from a past life, whatever you want to call it. And in turn of us meeting and dancing in orbit, orchestrated this initiation for me individually and for her individually. And we were meant to have a contract with each other for a period of time in order we got to a point where we could say goodbye, where it was time to say goodbye. And we tried to make it work as long as we could until we realized that the healing and the loving was actually letting go and say goodbye. And surrendering to a truth inside of us that maybe we felt, but we didn't really want to admit that we were brought to each other for a while, but not forever, which is a hard realization to come to. But so in turn, this is what opened me up to God. I thought losing her and saying goodbye to her was the end of God, but it was actually the beginning. My crown had started opening while I was in this relationship, but when we split up, that's when the crown started to blast. That's also when the greatest sort of density came back around. I thought it was out of the acute stages of my initiation. It was like, God's like, there's even another level that you need to experience in the rupture of this relationship. And it felt like I didn't know what I was going to do. Like it felt like I was going to move to Austin. I was going to be a step parent to her kids. I was going to marry her. I was going to live in Austin. I felt such a resonance to Austin, and I still do. But I realized that actually going to Austin was about completing karma rather than finding my destiny. Maybe one day Austin will still be my destiny, but at that point in my journey, it was about completing karma. It wasn't about my destiny. I actually wasn't ready for my destiny yet. So my ego was like, yeah, I'm ready to marry this woman. You're ready to see your destiny. But God checked my ego and humbled me and showed me, Jamie, there's more. You have to eradicate your ego at a different level. You have to go through this attachment rupture. And so now I had everything sort of planned out, and now that was shattered. Now I felt like I was learning to walk again. I didn't know it was an empty canvas. And so I thought it was the end of God. It was actually the beginning of God. The crazy density came. My crown started to blast open. This, in the wake of that relationship and the breakup, is when I really started to be able to energetically map God in my body. I began to get it. I began to get it in a way that I feel so much of the spiritual community doesn't. And so what it was almost like I was accessing was so much of spiritual community talks about like twin flames and these different relationships as sort of the sacred union. I realized we typically need to go through a big rupture with someone who we have an ancient karmic contract with. We're lovers from a past life. We have to go through an attachment rupture from the spirit realm, where a spiritual ego gets checked and we get humbled and we move into the deepest surrender of our life. And now we're totally in the unknown. And so this is where I really had to learn to anchor myself in the unknown. The other really big, important piece is in the past year and a half, my inner love addict began to come up, because what I realized was how much I had been searching for a relationship or different connections. And so in that time, I've had a couple of like really short things, but no serious relationships in the year and 8 months. So, you know, I've talked to some different people and had some different prospects that lasted for a little while. And I had like one very sort of short-lived relationship. But all in all, what I realized was, in a way, I was trying to go back to sort of the same wound that was trying to be healed in the rupture with that woman. Ways that, again, I would look for surrogate mothers, or I didn't have my own masculine foundation in myself in a practical way, but also in a very energetic way in my body. And so in the past year and a half, I've had my deepest unworthiness come up, my deepest fears, deepest elements of the little boy, having a look at the ways that I tried to escape my unworthiness, escape my internal shame, escape myself from like a fear of having to come in my power and like fully face the deepest elements of myself, and how I would use like dating, relationships, or whatever sort of distractions in feminine energy, ways that I would actually overstep my own internal boundaries with my ego, the ways that I would actually search for approval and validation from women who I knew that couldn't meet me. And it was actually so that I never really had to fully receive. If I overstepped my own internal boundaries with my ego and entertained a woman, maybe I was attracted to her, but I know she could never meet me at my level. I don't mean that in a self-righteous way, just in knowing in my intuition, that she wasn't what I wanted, that she wasn't able to meet me. I wouldn't have to receive from her, that I could just sort of be someone in a position of power, that I could, you know, kind of have that teacher hat on a little bit. And that's ways that I would avoid intimacy. That's ways that I would not have to face the deepest elements of myself. And so in the year and a half since we split up, it's been pretty gnarly, the shit that's come up. And so basically the way that I look at it is that when we split up, I was experiencing an attachment rupture from another life. So I was experiencing an attachment rupture from the quantum field up here, from the quantum realm. And so I thought she was my destiny. Her and Austin was my destiny, but it was actually a karmic lesson, a catalyst meant to bring everything up, then have this big rupture so that I could finally surrender and let go and heal these other aspects that have come up, so I could truly become my own hero, so that I could truly create my own masculine foundation, so that when I eventually do bring another woman into my space, that she's able to surrender to me, that she's able to trust me, that she's able to feel this masculine foundation that I've created. And I really realized that I had so many different elements I had to do in terms of building my empire, different creative projects that I want to build before I'm really able to sort of bring someone into that space. And so through that year and a half, year and 8 months since we split up, coming to present day, I've healed my inner love addict. The ways that I would look for fantasy relationships, roller coasters, the way that I would look for approval and validation, that sort of dopamine inflation and sensory experience is gone. It's gone. And I'm discerning and boundaried as fuck, particularly with women in a way that I never have been. And I wouldn't have gotten here without the rupture of that relationship. And so what it really feels like in the past year and 8 months is that God has merged relationally. God has like really landed in my root. God has really integrated into my body, and I've moved through my deepest possible unworthiness, that now as I record and post this video just before Christmas 2024, I feel like 2025, I'm really going to be stepping into my highest timeline and the timeline of my higher self. Like I'm really actually able to hold that vibration in my body in a way that I wasn't before, in a way that I thought I was able to in 2021, 2022, but I realized I had to go through that rupture. And so actually what happened in that rupture is I had to work through my deepest possible attachment trauma. I realized the ways fear, and attachment trauma is always in the face, right? So as you begin to open up the face, open up the third eye, the crown begins to open. And so now my face, my third eye, and my crown started to open, ways that my mother wound, ways that I would try to co-regulate with my mom and then surrogate partners and feminine partners, that I purged through that to now that I feel secure, safe, and in my power when I can only feel myself in the world. When I can only feel myself in the world, I'm coming into this level of regulation, this level of power, this level of trust and sovereignty in myself that I wasn't at when I was in that relationship with this woman, and had to go through the letting go and the rupture of that scary thing, because it felt like death. It felt like I was saying goodbye to a part of my soul. But really it was actually the liberation that so many human parts of me needed. And now so much what's happening is really the ethereal, esoteric, higher dimensional parts of me and what my oracle can access are really merging with this like real practical human in the earth, sovereign, in the soil, attachment, trauma, codependency. It's all coming together. Everything is beginning to come together at the end of 2024 as I move into 2025. Basically every aspect of my gifts, my talents, I feel kind of coming together like a symphony that just weren't ready to at the time of this relationship. And so this is what I call the attachment rupture, where I had a rupture with a crazy karmic spiritual relationship, twin flame, lovers in a past life, everything. I've experienced all those feelings that everyone talks about, that like we know each other and the sex was the most insane thing ever. We were accessing all the dimensions. I've done all that. And had it not work out, and I've realized what happens on the other side when you surrender and let go to that connection and you say goodbye. And we've only talked a little bit, had a little bit of completion. We have had completion, but just only just as of recent, really, because we had a lot of space. And just send some loving messages and just extending gratitude to one another and for the time we had, and sending love and hope you're well and wish happy holidays, all those things. So it's good. No animosity or contention there now, which is a beautiful thing. And but I had to go through that rupture, which it put me onto the path of my God's work and informed everything that I teach professionally. And personally, it totally connected me to God. It totally fucking connected me to God, and in a way where I've reoriented my attachment system to that of God now. I've totally reoriented my attachment system to God. And now I belong to the angels. I belong to God. I purged the deepest attachment trauma from my face. I blasted open the crown. And now I'm moving into a masculine foundation in my life where I can truly move into the freedom, liberation, joy, and sovereignty of myself that had always been elusive to me for so long. It's all coming. It's all happening in my body right fucking now. And it would have never happened if I hadn't said goodbye to this partner and gone through that relational experience. So that's part 5 of my awakening journey, the attachment rupture from the woman who I call an angel catalyst. She was an angel brought to me by God to lead me to my initiation, to bring up everything that needed to be brought up, then have rupture so that I could truly surrender and move through the next level to totally connect to God. So thanks so much, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you in the final part of my awakening journey, part 6.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for watching my latest YouTube video. If you enjoyed this video, I have lots of other related YouTube content that might percolate your interest off to the right side of the screen. And if you would be so inclined to like, comment, and share this video with a friend, and of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel.